a medium chain triglyceride doesn't get absorbed in the lymphatic system and then get stored as fat. It actually goes right to the liver to be produced for ketone bodies. And so another fat that does that is ALA, which is the parent omega-3 that we get from plants, is a very ketogenic fat, and most people don't realize that. And so the reason why omega-3s are so important is you have this overall fat-burning machinery in your liver, which is called beta oxidation. And the long-chain omega-3s, EPA and DHA, turn on the genes to make you a better fat burner. So your beta oxidation in the liver goes up. So just sitting, me and you here, we're gonna be burning 20% better our beta oxidation when we're consuming 3 to 4 grams of long-chain omega-3s per day. During exercise, your beta oxidation goes up by 30% if you're consuming that amount of long-chain omega-3. So you're a better fat burner already by getting those healthy marine fats from like wild salmon. Then you actually consume ALA, which is a ketogenic substrate. And so it's really important to integrate omega-3s because you're getting ketogenic substrates, but you're also a better fat burning machine.
Hello and welcome back. It's Mike Mutz with highintensityhealth.com. As always, I'm super excited that you're here. Today it's part 2 with Dr. James DiNicolantonio. About 18 months ago or so, he was on the podcast and we talked all about salt and athletic performance. I'll put a link right here. It was an awesome video. I'd highly suggest checking it out in addition to this video if you have not already. But today we're talking all about different forms of fat, different types of fat, different fatty acid chain lengths, and how those affect your metabolism. So if you're interested in learning different nuances and ways to burn more fat for fuel, this is a show for you, brought to you by our friends over at perfectketo.com, the makers of high-quality exogenous ketone, MCT oil powder, and other blood sugar health support formulas. And guys, they have a new great bar that's available now. It's called the Keto Bar. Definitely check it out. 10 grams of protein from real whole foods, also only 1 gram of sugar. The rest is coming from fiber and good healthy fats derived from coconut oil, whole real food like almonds and other things. There's no carrageenan or weird stabilizers or things like that. It doesn't fall apart and break or get stuck in your teeth like other low carb, high fat bars. So I would recommend it. And you can save 20% off on your order and on these bars. Again, you can go to perfectketo.com/HIH and upon checkout, save 20% off by using the promo code HIH20 at checkout. With that, friends, let's dive back into it with Dr. James.
Welcome back to another video. It's Mike Mutzel here. I'm with Dr. James DiNicolantonio. Super excited to have him back on the show. As you know, we talked all about salt. I think it was like a year and a half ago.
Yep.
That interview was awesome. Really good to be with you, buddy.
Thanks, brother. Good to see
great. Maybe just for purposes of like being complete, let's revisit the context of salt.
Yeah.
Because today we're going to talk about fats and ketosis and everything.
Sure.
And increasing your salt intake on a low carb diet is just part and parcel with success, I think. And would you agree?
Yeah. Absolutely. So, salt is so important for both when you go on a low carb diet, you don't absorb as much salt. So glucose helps us absorb salt. So when you cut the carbohydrates, you don't absorb salt as well. And then of course you have more energy to work out. So when you exercise, you sweat out salt and iodine. So really the book is about healthy salts, not really the processed salt. Because certain salts contain iodine too, which you lose through sweat. And so Redmond real salt is my go-to. So that's something important. And salt is important because when you cut the carbs down, the insulin levels drop, and insulin is what kind of helps the kidneys retain salt. So when you drop the insulin levels, the kidneys flush out the salt. And so you have both a decreased absorption of salt when you cut the carbohydrates, and then you also have an increased spilling of salt and water out the urine. And so most people, when they switch over to a ketogenic diet, are going to need probably an extra 2 grams of sodium for the first week and then an extra 1 gram like long term.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of people in that space are now promoting like 4 grams per day, 4 to 5 grams per day. Is that a little overshooting for some people, or is it all?
It honestly depends on so many factors: exercise, caffeine, where you live, the climate. So it just depends. But a normal salt diet seems to be for when you cut the carbs, probably around 4 to 6 grams of sodium is probably the ideal target.
Mm-hmm. Like our ancestors hunting and foraging, fermenting, they're naturally getting it in.
They're getting it in, well, primarily what they would do is they would get it they would consume the entire animal, right? So actually organs are very concentrated in sodium, like the kidneys, the liver, and then they would get it in the blood. So blood is extremely salty. And so we're not just eating muscle meat now without the blood and the organs and all these other things and the skin, when our skin actually stores sodium. And then actually we would gather certain algae too, and extremely, like spirulina has 400 milligrams of sodium per ounce. So I mean, 1 ounce, I mean, you can easily eat a half a pound of spirulina, and certain cultures would gather it too. So yeah, I mean, and we would just follow animals to salt licks. Yeah. So, you know, we're not stupider than an animal, right? So like if they can find a salt lick, we would actually go to the salt lick as well and just consume salt straight up, or we would go to saline sources and consume that as well.
What sort of mechanisms allow animals, or maybe you haven't read this, I'm very curious about this, like how does a deer know to find a salt lick? Is there some sort of like radar? I mean, how do they...
No, that's a good point. It's honestly, and their mapping system is the same as ours. It's really the dopamine system in the brain. The reward center gets hyperactivated when you don't have enough salt. So you seek it out and crave it more, and then when you actually find it, you get a greater high. And so when you're not getting enough salt, it can cross over to sugar too. So sugar can be more addictive, and other drugs of abuse can actually be more addictive when you're not getting enough sodium. And actually animal studies have shown this. If you deplete an animal of sodium, they actually get a greater reward from things like amphetamine and cocaine because the reward center in the brain is hyperactivated. And so low salt diets may actually be predisposing to sugar addiction and drug addiction, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But I wrote a couple articles about that, and there's some good evidence behind it.
Yeah, I mean, it's important for people to know this because I think addictions are at an all-time high. There was Mac Miller, I think it's whatever, a famous rapper amongst millennials just passed away from addiction like last night.
Yeah,
so that was sad. Like, all over the media and stuff like that. So we see this, addictions, all kinds. Like now in food addiction, I think is being more talked about, which is really good.
Yeah.
So anyway, so salt can be great for pre-workout. I mean, since meeting with you and promoting that tip and so forth, I've had so many messages. People are like, dude, I take 3 grams of salt before workout and I feel amazing. Like I don't need as much caffeine. So I want to thank you for that tip because that's...
no, I mean, honestly, I didn't think that would be like what most people gathered to on the salt. I thought it'd be more about being able to eat healthier. But honestly, the exercise aspect has been the best for a lot of people. And what is important though is that you want to use salt to eat high potassium foods. So it's not like eat a bunch of salt and don't eat a good diet and where you're getting a lot of potassium and magnesium. Because if you're not getting enough potassium, your body is not going to be able to handle as much salt. So it is important to get good amounts of potassium, but I use salt to allow me to do that. Because my kids won't eat bitter greens and I really don't like them if I don't add a little bit of salt to it.
Mm-hmm. I see. So it's more like a delivery vehicle, really.
Exactly.
But I thought plants are bad. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to talk about the carnivorous diet and plants and whole foods. But one final question here. So we hear oftentimes by traditional media and dietitians that salt is bad for us, right? And you talked about how insulin, when you have high levels of insulin, it helps to retain salt. Could that be kind of that connection where people are eating a lot of junk food, blood sugar's all over the place, insulin is high, so therefore blood sodium would be higher? Is that it? Yeah,
well, that's one aspect. But really what it comes down to is when you don't get enough sodium, all your stress hormones get activated to retain it. And your body becomes insulin resistant to raise the insulin levels to help your kidneys retain it more. So literally eating a low amount of sodium is just as bad as eating a high amount of sugar in regards to insulin resistance. And so numerous studies and meta-analyses show that low salt diets significantly raise insulin levels and insulin AUC after you eat a glucose load and cause insulin resistance. So if you want to stay insulin sensitive, you want to get an adequate amount of sodium.
Okay. Another story that has emerged, since your book launch, is that microplastics are found in the ocean and all that. So maybe can we cover that a little bit? And is that why you recommend the Redmond mineral salt?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So numerous studies have come out where they test 13 different sea salts. And because the sea salts come from a modern day ocean, 12 of 13 in one study had significant amounts of microplastics and nanoplastics. And so those are kind of like endocrine disruptors, and they can mess with your body and they can accumulate. And so, when you get a salt from an ancient ocean like Redmond, you're not going to have to deal with that. So it was formed millions of years ago. And so that's just another important aspect of choose a healthy salt that's potentially not going to have the microplastics in them.
As I drink mineral water, hopefully it doesn't have microplastics in it. But it's scary that we have to now think about that. But the oceans, have so much plastic in them. And there was one study I read, and I have not had water out of a plastic bottle for a very long time due to this reason. I think it was 78% or close to 80% of all plastic water bottles have high levels of microplastic.
Yeah, and there was one study that showed I think it was Nestle plastic water had the highest levels, which was crazy, but.
It's just yet another thing we have to deal with. And already our friends and family think we're crazy for doing all the stuff we do. And now it's now we told them to drink, filtered water, but not out of plastic. And it's really hard to find water in glass jars. And so it was funny last time we met, we were both independently fans of Gerald Steiner water. Why is it that you like it so much?
A couple reasons. So one is the bicarbonate's really good to balance out salt. So salt's a little acidic, and bicarbonate either through plants or through Gerolsteiner, which has bicarbonate in it, is alkaline. So it helps kind of balance the acidity out. So that's one benefit. The second benefit is it's a great vehicle for calcium and magnesium. It just is. And it's got about a 3.45 to 1 ratio of calcium to magnesium, which is a good ratio. I mean, you really don't want to be above like 5 to 1. And it's got 100 milligrams of magnesium per liter, which is huge. San Pellegrino is about 50 milligrams. So it's twice the amount of magnesium as San Pel. So
that's amazing. Yeah, because magnesium can be expensive and hard to find in the diet, right?
Yeah, and it's better absorbed when it's ionic, when it's like dissolved in liquid. So it's a great way to get your magnesium. You don't need a ton when it's coming from a liquid ionic form like that.
Great. All right, let's talk about fat. I mean, there's all kinds of debate about fat right now. I think most people are realizing that like whole food based fats are good for them and help suppress satiety and all that sort of thing. But then there was that was it New England Journal of Medicine or JAMA recently, a couple weeks ago, talked about there's like kind of a prospective cohort study / meta-analysis. Walter Willett was involved in that. So we're kind of, it seems like traditional medical doctors are getting the message that we need to be having 50% of our diet in the energy form of carbohydrates. So where are we going wrong there?
Yeah, so I mean, the book Superfuel is really about more of like a cyclical ketogenic diet, and I mean, you can do a high carb diet well, and you can do it bad, and you can do a low carb diet well, and you can do a low carb diet bad. Really, just depends. This book is really breaking out. Ketogenic diets, 70 to 80% of your calories are coming from fat. So, but which fats should we be consuming, right? And so we kind of were laughing that, people they're going on keto and they're like, oh, I just ate like 4 patties at Wendy's, like I'm low carb and this is great and this is healthy. And it's like, actually those patties are probably deep fried in vegetable oil and they're not from grass-fed animals. And so you're losing out on vitamin E and vitamin A and a certain fat called CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, which the animals, they get through the grass, gets into the fats. And so, I mean, it's completely different consuming like fats from an animal that's been set to pasture versus an animal that's been fed grain and corn.
Totally. I mean, that qualitative difference, I think, gets lost in the narrative. And why do you think that is? I mean, because is it too complicated for people to understand that there is a qualitative difference, or is it that we don't have yet enough data to say that there is a difference?
No, I think we do. I think we do have enough data. I think a lot of people kind of say, well, every animal is grass-fed, it's just they're grain-finished. But the problem is that last 30 or 60 days of being fed grain dramatically changes the omega-3 and omega-6 content, and also dramatically changes the antioxidant levels in the meat, the vitamin E in the meat, which can be 10 times higher in a grass-finished animal versus a grain-finished. So I think that nuance kind of gets lost. It's also a little bit more expensive to consume. And so to try to, health is one on the margin though. So, it's certainly expensive for certain people. So the thing is if cost is an issue for people, I would say at least get pastured eggs, because farm factory eggs are the absolute worst thing you can consume.
Why would you say that?
Because there's already a lot of omega-6 in the egg. And so when you're getting it through a factory farmed egg, it's just poor quality omega-6. And now these animals, they don't have the good nutrients to prevent that omega-6 from oxidizing. So I avoid farm raised eggs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those chickens never leave a cage that's like 12 by 12, right, and they never see sunlight. I mean, yeah, I've seen some of those like undercover cameras because I have chickens myself, and I'm like, my chickens run around on a third of an acre and like poop and pee. They do all this to eat bugs, and these chickens are literally in a cage. I'm like, the nutrient deficiencies in that bird must, and they're drinking out of plastic. I mean, it's really, it can't be healthy at all. It's really sad. So at least with cows, they have to support like thousands of pounds or hundreds of pounds, right? So they have to have a little bit of muscle mass, and even if they're in a feedlot, right? So I think that's always a better choice. Like if you're going out, you're with a bunch of family members, you're not going to influence where they're going to go to. Right. So you're like, all right, I'm at Outback Steakhouse. You got pork, chicken, or beef. What are you going to order?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, probably not the chicken. Probably the beef. Yeah. To be all honest. because it's going to be, it's the lowest meat that's in for omega-6 wise. Pork's going to be probably the highest. Pork and chicken are going to be much higher in omega-6 than beef. And so I still do think it is important though to try and get beef. You can see the difference. Like the fat has the beta carotene. You'll see the fat, it will be yellow or there'll be an orangish hue to it. So it's definitely different. And there's actually more antioxidant enzymes in the meat, which is actually really important. So when blood flow stops to the muscle, and the meat's hung for weeks and then we consume it, the iron's released and it starts actually breaking down the proteins and oxidizing the protein and the fats. So that's why it is important that grass-fed animals have these extra antioxidants and vitamins to kind of reduce that oxidation that's occurring while the meat is being hung for weeks before you actually consume it and get it at the supermarket. And so, it's kind of like, when I read that study and I was like, wow, like I didn't realize that this is what's going on when blood flow stops to the muscle. All these iron ions are coming out and kind of causing oxidative, proteins and fats in the meat. So you do kind of want to, I try to balance meat with some type of antioxidant food to kind of counter that.
That's brilliant. We often hear about the cooking process creating advanced glycation end products and so forth. But I never have thought about that. It makes a lot of sense. Like after, the killing and the harvesting and so forth, that you can create a pro-oxidant, then eat that. And so really by eating the grass, these animals, how they would live naturally, there's a natural increase in those antioxidants that will neutralize that.
Exactly, like glutathione, catalase, superoxide dismutase, and then cooking. What do you cook the meat in, right? And so, absolutely, I do pastured butter. It tastes so much better. It's yellow. It's not white. You get the good vitamin K2 from it. I try not to cook very, very high with animal fats because they have cholesterol, and you can potentially oxidize the cholesterol. But still great to cook with animal fats compared to vegetable oils, because vegetable oils, that's probably honestly the number one killer of Americans, honestly what I believe, is that cooking those omega-6 vegetable oils, because they cause oxidation products that can cross-link proteins, and actually there's been studies that show that it can lead to neurofibrillary tangles in the brain because they're called advanced lip oxidation end products, ALs. So we just kind of mentioned ages, but these ALs, advanced lip oxidation end products, when linoleic acid oxidizes either in the bottle from the omega-6 or when you consume it, the acid actually will oxidize that omega-6. You absorb those oxidation products and they can actually damage DNA and protein, and then they cross-link the proteins and create those advanced lip oxidation end products, which can potentially lead to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and things like that.
That's so crazy. Is that why maybe some people have low glutathione levels and all that sort of stuff? Is because their body's trying to constantly combat some of these damaged lipids that they eat?
Yeah, no, I absolutely think that's a huge driver of oxidative stress in the body, is those vegetable oils. And they were promoted, really, what launched it was Procter & Gamble and their donation of $1.75 million to the American Heart Association, which is
crazy.
Was such a scandal.
You talk about that in the book?
I
haven't
do.
read it yet, so that's awesome. That's, the backstory, people need to hear that over and over and over again, because it's almost like they can't believe it. Like the deception and the corruption is how deep it runs.
Yeah, no, the story's crazy. So we can talk about that a little bit. So basically, what ended up happening is you had the invention of the cotton gin in the late 1700s. So we were only, in the United States, we were only producing like 600 pounds of cotton. And then within 9 years of the invention of the cotton gin, all of a sudden you had 40 million pounds of cotton being produced. And with 100 pounds of cotton, you get 160 pounds of cotton seed. And it's like, what do we do with all this cotton seed, right? You only need 5% to plant the new crop. So you have all this cotton seed. And so Procter & Gamble comes along, extracts the oil, and starts making candles to light homes with that oil. And then the oil industry hits in the mid-1800s. And so they have all this, Procter & Gamble has all this cottonseed oil. They have nothing to do with it now because we're using oil to light homes. And so a German chemist, Wilhelm Norman, actually invented partial hydrogenation. So Procter & Gamble bought that patent in 1909, and then they opened up their own lab and they created Crisco, which stands for crystallized cottonseed oil. And so that was invented in 1911. And so now you have a solid fat that can, quote unquote, replace lard and tallow, but for a fraction of the cost. And it was just promoted back then. Every health claim you could imagine, nothing was regulated back then. So they said that it's going to improve your health and kids love it, and moms make better cakes with Crisco. They created a bunch of cookbooks, and obviously every recipe had Crisco. And so that's really the integration first of the industry into the diet, influencing our diet. And then you had the Great Depression, which hit in 1929, and so Americans really didn't have the money to buy animal fats anymore, and so the animal fats are also being rationed for the World War soldiers, and so that's what ended up happening. We were almost forced to consume these vegetable oils, and then what ended up happening is the American Heart Association, they were virtually just a group of cardiologists that no one knew until Procter & Gamble gave them $1.75 million and really launched them now as like the leading cardiovascular type of group, and they have a tremendous amount of influence. And they still recommend that we get 5 to 10% of our calories from linoleic acid, which is the main omega-6 fat in vegetable oils. And yet there's never been a single study to ever show that we should be consuming that much omega-6. In fact, really the only study that's actually tested that was the Lyon Diet Heart study. And they were consuming, in the control group, over 5% of their energy from linoleic acid, and they dropped it down to below, it was like 3.5%. And that cut cardiovascular events and mortality by 70%. Wow. So it's like actually the clinical evidence shows the exact opposite. We shouldn't be consuming 5 to 10% of our energy from linoleic acid. If anything, we should only be consuming like 3.5% of our energy.
Because that's very pro-inflammatory, or it's prone to oxidation, or both?
Yeah, well, we're not getting it from whole foods, first of all. So it's like the vegetable oils that we're consuming is very pro-inflammatory. Right from the get-go, in order to extract these oils, they're coming from seeds. So you can't just like crush a seed and get the oil out. So it takes like $1 million process to do in heavy machinery. They use hexane solvents to dissolve it and to get the liquid out. So already it's like this like toxic poison that you're about to consume. They have to like deodorize it and winterize it. It's like, what is this, a tire on a car, or is this, you know what I mean? Like what's going, like they're using all these crazy chemical processes to kind of like dampen the oxidation products so you can like smell the rancidity of it. And then it just sits in clear plastic bottles on the shelf, oxidizing, right? Light's hitting it 24/7. Then you cook with it, further oxidizing these susceptible fats. Because omega-6 is so susceptible, especially from these oils, because of the double bonds. It has a bunch of double bonds that easily oxidizes, and now it's been stripped out of the whole food, so it doesn't have the vitamin E to prevent it from oxidizing.
Just kind of like the animal meat, like we were talking about, grass-fed versus feedlot.
Exactly.
That is so crazy. I was in South America in May, and as we filmed this in early September, and I wanted to go to a store. I was in Mexico, and I was looking around, and I had my video camera. I haven't posted the vlog yet, but the amount of, speaking of vegetable oils in clear containers, it was an entire, like imagine going to a store seeing like the cereal aisle is like 50 feet long. That's how long it was. It was just canola oils, the grapeseed oil and so forth. It was really frightening, and I was looking, the olive oil section was like this big. I mean, it was really crazy. So it's like our influence on the world, like speaking about the US, our influence on like what people are eating and how they're cooking is crazy. I was just blown away.
And you know what is probably the most confusing fat, like is it healthy, is canola oil, because it's high in omega-3, so a lot of people think it is healthy, right? But if it's not cold pressed, it's already going to be oxidized, and potentially even cold pressed canola can have up to 5% trans fats in it, which is kind of crazy. It's because it's so susceptible to oxidation when you pull the fat from the actual whole food, which is terrible. And the other thing is cooking with canola oil is the worst thing you can do. It's one of the worst fats to cook with because it's so susceptible to oxidation. So I still don't even recommend canola oil, even if it's cold pressed and you're just drizzling it on vegetables or salad, exactly. But I mean, every now and again, I think it's probably okay. But I would always try to stick with extra virgin olive oil. Try to know the source. You should be able to taste the pepperiness to it. The oleocanthal has that, like when you swallow it, there should be some heat to it. Yeah. That's a good indicator of the polyphenols in there. And so it's tough though. There's a lot of products out there that claim olive oil and they're contaminated with vegetable oils, which just kind of sucks.
It's scary. I mean, is there any regulatory bodies now that are like independently looking for that?
I think if you go organic and it actually has a date where it was sourced, that's a good indication of a healthy olive oil. And I try to always get it in a dark glass vial. So just like you want to drink, water out of a glass if you can, you want to get your olive oil out of a glass, a dark, glass as well.
Right. What do you do like when you travel? And so if you go to a Whole Foods like salad bar, for example, or even actually a lot of natural food stores, they call it can olive for canola olive mix. Yeah. And it's like, I think they're trying to save on cost because olive oil is way more expensive. Yeah. So in that situation, if you had that maybe once a week or once a month, you might be okay. But what would you do to prophylactically? Would you have more like cilantro, more blueberries? Like how could you mitigate some of that?
Yeah, no, that's a great, getting foods that have high polyphenols to prevent the oxidation. Yeah.
Okay. Or just try to avoid it. Make your food at home.
Yeah, if you can. But a lot of people too are concerned about, well, saturated fats, they don't have any double bonds. Olive oil does, don't cook with olive oil. Yeah. But olive oil is extremely high in polyphenols. And so the smoke point too, a lot of people get a little confused and say, well, if it has a high smoke point, like avocado oil, it's great to cook with. Extra virgin olive oil is much better to cook with than avocado oil. Not that avocado oil is bad, just avocados and avocado oil have virtually no polyphenols, whereas olive oil is super high in polyphenols. And so I've looked at a lot of the cooking studies and the oxidation products that occur, and olive oil is even better than coconut oil in regards to the oxidation products that occur because of the polyphenols. And so the smoke point is only determined by 1% of the oil, the free fatty acids, whereas everything else, the 99% of it, oxidation products that you're consuming, and you want to have high polyphenol content. So if you want to cook with a fat, extra virgin olive oil is extremely good, and it helps prevent a lot of the advanced glycation end products too. I always coat my meat in extra virgin olive oil, or you can do like an apple cider vinegar, or any type of vinegar is really good at preventing advanced glycation end products when you cook.
During the cooking, and how is that? What is?
I don't know exactly how. It just, I think the acidity of it and some of the other properties just prevent the glycation products from forming. Like vinegar, it can reduce it by 90%. It's probably the best thing to reduce that.
Interesting. Gosh, my buddy Jeff LeCoven, he always coats his meat with olive oil, and I was always thinking, like, what are you doing? I mean, coconut oil, I had that mindset, and I got to shift that thanks to you. So it's not that the smoke point, that's like kind of a marginal factor, and the high polyphenols in the olive oil make that a much better product.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yep.
So if you're going to fry up, maybe make sweet potato fries or something, you definitely do olive oil.
Yeah. 100%.
We're always taught to use coconut or avocado because of the smoke point.
Yeah.
Interesting. So if you were to go to, so if Wendy's made a national campaign or Jack in the Box said, we're dumping all the whatever and just going all olive oil for our French fries, would you be maybe okay with that or?
Probably not, because I'm me and I'm type A personality. I'm not, but I think if you're going to eat a French fry, it would best be cooked in olive oil, extra virgin olive oil.
Right.
Yeah.
And then to finish off kind of the meat cooking discussion, low heat vinegar, or balsamic vinegar, and or coat it with olive oil beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. And don't get me wrong, animal fats are great to cook with too. Yeah. So I don't want to be here and say cooking with lard and things like that is bad. It's not. But the polyphenols actually absorb into the meat as well. And so actually olive oil kind of makes the meat actually even healthier because they're absorbing it as well. So that is my go-to to cook with.
I wonder if you're on the carnivorous diet, if you can have olive oil in your meat, or would that be a no-no?
That's a fruit, right? It's a fruit oil. Man. I don't know.
Well, we'll talk about that in a minute, but I definitely want to kind of finish up on fats because before we started recording, you were talking about like how chain length of the fat affects the thermic effect of it, which I think is a new narrative people are probably interested in learning more about.
Yeah, so really superfuel is, everyone's doing keto. How do we enhance it now? What fats can you select to actually start losing even more fat and becoming a better fat burner? And so long chain saturated fats are fine. They're not bad. They're just not as good as things like oleic acid and the omega-3s because of numerous factors. So thermic effect is the amount of calories that is required to digest the food. So most people know that like almonds and nuts have a tremendous thermic effect. Like you only really absorb like 70% of the calories from almonds because of the thermic effect. And so olive oil has twice the thermic effect as long chain saturated fats from like cream and dairy and things like that, and cheese. So you use twice the amount of calories just to digest olive oil than you do versus like butter. So that's kind of important. But then the other thing is the fat oxidation rate of a fat. And so olive oil, as well as medium chain triglycerides, obviously, and omega-3s and long chain omega-6s too, have a higher fat oxidation rate, meaning they liberate more calories versus being stored than long chain saturated fats. Not to say that they're bad, it's just that if you start integrating more things like avocados and nuts and seeds and wild salmon, that's going to be better than just guzzling down whole milk and full fat cheeses and fatty meats, salami and things like that, because it's going to be burned better, stored less, have a higher thermic effect.
And it has to do with chain length specifically, or
Partially,
okay.
yeah.
Because it seems like the longer chain fats need to go through a different transport protein, carnitine mediated, right? There's a little bit more steps involved.
You're right. So a medium chain triglyceride doesn't get absorbed in the lymphatic system and then get stored as fat. It actually goes right to the liver to be produced for ketone bodies. And so another fat that does that is ALA, which is the parent omega-3 that we get from plants, is a very ketogenic fat, and most people don't realize that. And so the reason why omega-3s are so important is you have this overall fat-burning machinery in your liver, which is called beta oxidation. And the long-chain omega-3s, EPA and DHA, turn on the genes to make you a better fat burner. So your beta oxidation in the liver goes up. So just sitting, me and you here, we're going to be burning 20% better our beta oxidation when we're consuming 3 to 4 grams of long chain omega-3s per day. During exercise, your beta oxidation goes up by 30% if you're consuming that amount of long chain omega-3. So you're a better fat burner already by getting those healthy marine fats from like wild salmon. Then you actually consume ALA, which is a ketogenic substrate. And so it's really important to integrate omega-3s because you're getting ketogenic substrates, but you're also a better fat burning machine.
I love that. But so many people right now are going, wait, I've heard of PUFAs and polyunsaturated, fatty acids, and isn't omega, like you said, EPA, DHA, aren't those a PUFA? Like, should I not? And they heard probably that ALA is a PUFA as well. So I think this is where context kind of comes in. How would you differentiate that for people?
Yeah, so they're both polyunsaturated fats. One difference is we're getting 20 to 30 grams of linoleic acid, where we're only getting maybe, if we're like consuming wild salmon, maybe 4 grams. So you're getting like 5 times the amount of omega-6, and the oxidation products of those are going to be a lot more because you're getting so much less of omega-3. So that's one difference of why omega-3s and their susceptibility to oxidation isn't as big of a deal as the omega-6 is. 2, I don't know anyone who's cooking with fish oil, right? Like opening up their capsules and cooking with it.
Yeah,
that would be expensive. So we're cooking with the omega-6s and we're not cooking with the omega-3s. 3 is we used to get a ton of omega-3s in our diet evolutionarily. Even out in the African savannah, we were the only ones who could actually access the brains, the skulls, besides hyenas. So anytime we would just literally gather all these skulls and get a ton of omega-3. The brain is more concentrated in omega-3s than salmon. So you get a tremendous amount of omega-3s evolutionarily. So we've always consumed a bunch of omega-3 if we're on the coast getting seafood. Even if we weren't on the coast, we have all these skulls that we would gather, and studies have shown humans over 2 million years ago, their burial sites, they're just surrounded by a bunch of skulls cracked open. And so that was like a great source of food that was always available because no other animal could get to it except maybe a hyena. They have the strength to do it. I don't really know if they were trying to do that, but humans would just gather all the skulls and consume a bunch of omega-3s, the long chains. So it's kind of like, I never realized that when I looked at those studies, I was like, wow, that makes sense. That's like an ample source of long chain omega-3s in the African savannah, even though we're thousands of miles away, let's say, from the ocean. So our bodies actually utilize omega-3s as a signal. The oxidation of it is an alarm bell. So if you don't, when you consume omega-3s, the DHA, there's an inner mitochondrial membrane, and there's something called the cardiolipin that DHA concentrates in. And so if a cell gets damaged, the DHA and the cardiolipin oxidizes. And so it's a good signal. If you don't have a lot of DHA in the cardiolipin, it can prevent the cell from apoptosis. So you want to have DHA as the signal to cause a cell that's damaged to undergo apoptosis, which is really important because you don't want a cell that's damaged to turn into a cancer cell. But the oxidation of omega-3, the body, we used to get it so much it knows what to do with it, and that's the signal. It signals caspase-3, and it signals the apoptotic signals for the cell to basically self-kill itself rather than turning into a cancer cell. So the oxidation of omega-3s in the body isn't really that big of a deal. It's not a bad thing. It's actually our body uses it as a signal to upregulate antioxidant enzymes when it oxidizes, because the body's got to have a way. How does it know it's being damaged? What's the first fat that's going to be damaged? It's a long chain omega-3 DHA, because DHA is a 22 carbon fat. It's got 6 double bonds, so it is very susceptible to oxidation. And so when your cells aren't saturated in it, your brain cells, when DHA oxidizes, it turns on NRF2 and heme oxygenase 1 and upregulates antioxidant enzymes. So really important that your brain is saturated with DHA to upregulate the antioxidant system when the omega-6 in your neurons are causing havoc, and the oxidation of that is causing havoc. Omega-3 is the pro-resolving factor. So we need to have inflammation to fight things, but it's supposed to be turned off, and our body uses omega-3s. They're called resolvents and protectants, or SPMs. These specialized pro-resolving mediators are formed from omega-3s. So super important, and that's kind of the difference between omega-3 PUFA and their susceptibility to oxidation versus the susceptibility to oxidation to the omega-6s.
So glad you clarified that, and people hit the rewind button to get that science again.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of had to dive
dude,
deep.
I'm like, damn, that's amazing. So you really know your stuff, man. I mean, I've interviewed quite a few people, and like, not too many people can rattle this off, so I love talking with you about this. But going back to that interference, if you will, associated with apoptosis and conversion potentially to a cancer cell. So, I mean, is it suffice it to say, if you have an omega-3 deficient diet, potentially that could be a carcinogenic diet?
Potentially.
Because of that cell mechanism?
Yeah, and a couple years ago when I was really into a low carb diet, I was like, I was really believing that cancer cells, if you starve them of exogenous glucose, it's really going to be beneficial. And it really only seems to be certain cancer cells in the brain. But cancer actually dramatically can utilize linoleic acid to feed its growth. So it literally will suck up the linoleic acid in your fat stores, which, by the way, has a half-life of 1 to 2 years. And the linoleic acid in our fat stores has gone from like 9% to 23%. So it's just like miracle grow for cancer growth. And cancer, even if you cut out exogenous glucose, it'll chew up cell membranes, it'll eat amino acids to fuel its growth, and it will suck up the fat stores of your linoleic acid, but it can't do it if you have really high levels of omega-3s. And so omega-3s block cancer from literally sucking up the linoleic acid. And what a cancer cell does is it converts the linoleic acid to arachidonic acid, and then it pushes out all these pro-inflammatory eicosanoids and things like that signal angiogenesis and blood vessel growth and supplying its nutrients. So when you cut out linoleic acid, and it's hard because it's in our fat cells. Right. So you can't just lower linoleic acid and think cancer's not going to be able to feed off it. It's got tons of your linoleic acid in its fat stores to feed off of. So if you consume high-dose omega-3s, it can potentially prevent cancer cells from sucking up that linoleic acid. And there's been clinical studies in humans and breast cancer patients that were given 4 grams of DHA, that if the breast tissue got saturated with the DHA enough, like about 50% of people who consumed it did, actually it got soaked up in their breast tissue. There was like a prolongation in life anywhere from 12 to 36 months. Whoa. Just by taking DHA in breast cancer patients. That's a long expansion of life.
Right. And is it going back to that affecting that apoptosis and caspase 3 pathway that you mentioned?
I think it's more blocking linoleic acid from being utilized by the cancer cell.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Through those resolving mediators or something else?
Through the transporter, it blocks the linoleic acid transporter on the cancer cell from actually absorbing it. And then it's crazy how cancer has the machinery to literally convert linoleic acid into like all these signals to feed its growth.
That is so crazy. I love these conversations because we hear like, oh, glucose feeds cancer, so therefore if you go low carb, it's anti-cancer, but it's like you're talking about, there's context in everything. So it's like different types of cancers, and cancer cells are, they evolve and mutate, right? So they're if you take away one fuel, it's going to figure another way, like glutamine, or
yep.
I didn't even know about this, like this omega-6 fat, amazing. So that's just yet another reason to eat real whole foods high in omega-3s. Yep. Maybe how do you feel about supplementation with omega-3s?
Yeah, I believe in supplementation because number one, not a lot of people can afford seafood, and there's problems with mercury, even in wild seafood, unless you're sourcing it from like Alaska, in certain waters in Alaska and in Canada. A lot of the wild seafood is just contaminated now with these dioxins and organic
PCBs,
yeah, exactly. And so it can be an issue, and it is stored in the fat. And so I think supplementation, there's a place for it. And what I do take krill oil. I take about 3 or 4 grams of krill oil for particular reasons. One, sustainability. Krill is the largest biomass, and it's regulated the Antarctic krill biomass. They can only take 1% of it. And krill oil is really great for numerous reasons. It's more close to an omega-3 from food than just a fish oil supplement. So Krill, the omega-3s are bound to phospholipids, so you're getting a good dose of choline. In 1 gram of krill, you can get anywhere from 50 to 75 milligrams of choline, which is very important to prevent fatty liver. 2, krill oil is high in astaxanthin and canthaxanthin, and so these are carotenoids that the krill is getting through consuming the microalgae. And so these carotenoids, astaxanthin, can span the entire cell membrane and can prevent oxidative stress outside and inside the cell. And so it's also preventing the omega-3s from oxidizing. So when you get your omega-3s from krill, you're getting that benefit of the astaxanthin, preventing any potential oxidation issues with that. And then being bound to phospholipids, just like we used to get DHA from brain, which is bound to phospholipids, the transporter in the brain will only take up DHA if it's bound to phosphatidylcholine. And so if you get your omega-3s from krill or through real foods, which are more bound to phospholipids than just fish oil, which is bound to triglycerides, you're going to get twice the absorption of the omega-3s in the brain, which is super important. And so that's kind of why I do try to supplement with krill 3 to 4 grams a day. Even if I'm consuming wild, I do try to consume wild salmon like once or twice a week. I do try to do, I love lobster. I know there's some issues with it. It's wild. I try to do it like once a week. But I kind of balance, there's these organic pollutants that can mess up, they basically bioaccumulate in fat. And so one of the best ways actually though to bind it and get rid of it is fiber. And I do consume a lot of high fiber foods. So that's kind of how I balance potentially getting those organic pollutants from the fat that I get. I consume it with a lot of high fiber foods, which can bind those dioxins and things like the PCBs, and you just kind of excrete it out.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. Again, going back to the kind of controversial carnivorous diet and are plants always bad, there's some benefits, right? And so that's why I think if you only pick one thing, you might be selling yourself short on all these other things. But let's kind of unpack a little bit. I think people aren't totally up to speed on, if they take omega-3s, right, either from krill or fish oil, that backbone that you mentioned, super important. So having that phospholipid, is that kind of like, how is that, I mean, maybe it's a little bit more complicated, you probably talk about in the book, but that gets absorbed into the brain better because it's just cell membrane transports?
Yeah, there's a transporter that literally will block DHA from going up unless it's a lysophosphatidylcholine DHA. And so the liver has to kind of add the choline back to the omega-3 if you're getting it in a triglyceride, or prescription fish oils are the worst to absorb because they're ethyl ester. And so if you don't consume it with fat, you only absorb 20% of an ethyl ester, like I don't know if I want to do brand names, but there are brand names, prescription omega-3s, they're ethyl ester, and you're only going to absorb 20%, whereas if it's a triglyceride-bound fish oil, you'll absorb 70%, and if it's a krill oil, you're going to get like 90% absorption. Yeah. So there are differences.
That's awesome. Yeah, that phosphatidylcholine, or phospholipid bound, plus having the astaxanthin phospholipid bound is great, because a lot of companies actually, I don't know if you've looked into this, but they'll provide a krill that's low in astaxanthin, they'll add in astaxanthin from seaweed. Yeah. But it's really not the same because it's not bound. It's kind of like you're putting it on, what do they call it? Put lipstick on, on our house. Yeah, something like that. So you want to make sure to look for that. And then what do you think? I just interviewed the folks over at IFOS, the International Fish Oil Standard Group, Nutrisource. So they do third-party testing, and they have ICOS for international krill oil. So they look at anisodine, which is a long-term oxidation. They look at arsenic because there's some arsenic in krill. So anyway, folks listening, I'll put the link to that because there's a really informative discussion about quality that people should be.
Yeah, no, and I take fish oil too because krill, even if you take 3 or 4 grams of krill, you're only going to get 500 milligrams of EPA and DHA. And the benefits of long-chain omega-3s, you don't actually gather until you get about the maximum benefits, 3 or 4 grams. And so I do supplement too. If I'm not getting my omega-3s that day from wild salmon or a wild shrimp or wild lobster or crab, things like that, I will take, I'm not going to mention brand names, but I do take an omega-3 that is regulated. They test the lipid peroxidations, so make sure the levels are low there. I store my fish oil in the freezer, and I store my krill oil in the fridge. Nice. So, and that honestly, you can expand the expiration date on fish oil like twofold if you store it in the freezer. Really important to do that.
Great tip. Yeah, a lot of people have this on their counter near the oven, or
right.
Realize that that supplements are susceptible to moisture, heat, all these different things, right? So, great point. So this is kind of off topic, but you and Max Lugavere must get along great on this topic because he's huge on krill and astaxanthin as well.
Yeah, and what's really important though is there's a huge debate on is fish oil beneficial. Eric Topol, who's like the editor-in-chief of MedPage today and Medscape, which I have tremendous respect for, he believes it's not beneficial. And the problem is the studies are testing Americans who are consuming 20 to 30 grams of omega-6 linoleic acid background. And the study only gives 1 gram of fish oil. So you're still a 20 to 30 to 1 ratio. You're never going to get benefit from omega-3s in a sea of omega-6. And that's why all these trials keep failing. But the old trials in the 80s and 90s, they actually showed tremendous benefit. And the reason is because they studied them in Italy and Japan, where the omega-6 is super low. And they also gave better doses. So the Jealous trial, which they gave on top of a Japanese diet where their omega-3 index was already 10%. They gave 2 grams of EPA, 1.8 grams. And it still significantly reduced cardiovascular events. That goes to show you that our omega-3 index really probably is maximum where we get the most benefit if we're 10, 12%. Most Americans are 4%, which increases your risk of sudden cardiac death by 10-fold. And so the studies that are failing now, they're failing because they're not even giving the right dose. They're not giving 3 or 4 grams, which is required to stabilize atherosclerotic plaque, lower your blood pressure, lower triglycerides. All the benefits, the vasodilatory benefits, are at those higher doses. So if you're not getting 3 to 4 grams, you're not really getting the benefits of omega-3s just by taking 1 gram.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, for practitioners now that aren't using fish oil clinically, one of the biomarkers we used when I was in the clinic with Gerard Guillory back in 06 was triglycerides. And fish oil, 3-4 grams, drop it like a rock. Yeah. I mean, it was amazing. And then fatty liver, you see liver enzymes start to drop as well, and then became better fat burners and lost weight and all that. So it's pretty profound.
Yeah, it is. And the exercise benefits of omega-3s are, honestly so overlooked. But omega-3s, we were talking about fat burning, so obviously that's good. And so it upregulates the genes in your liver to burn fat better. But also, there's a really big issue with sarcopenia, and you're losing the anabolic effect in older people to amino acids and insulin, and omega-3s can kind of fix that and reverse that. And so it's really important. A bunch of studies have shown now that if you give 3-4 grams of long-chain omega-3s as in fish oil, you can not only prevent the sarcopenia but reverse it. You increase muscle strength, maximum reps go up, like the amount that you're able to do 1 rep goes up, and the reason is muscle protein synthesis goes up with omega-3. So DHA is actually the pacemaker of the cell. And so when you consume these fats, right, there's a lipid bilayer, a phospholipid bilayer, where you have these polar heads and you have the fatty acid chain, 2 tails, and then you have another layer of those. And so the membrane becomes much more fluid when you consume long-chain omega-3s. And so it's the stiffness that actually have these membrane-bound proteins, right, that actually hormones will hit and ions will flow through. And if you don't have enough long-chain omega-3s, it becomes stiff and it starts pinching on the proteins. DHA makes the cell membrane super fluid. And so the reason why hummingbirds' wings can beat so fast is because their wings are saturated with DHA. So that's why they can beat 80 times a second. So DHA is the pacemaker of the cell. And so amino acids fly in and out of the cell much quicker. Sodium, glucose, everything almost comes
coming out to your body.
Yep. And so super important. Whereas if you consume those oxidized vegetable oils, the tails actually become oxidized and they start curling up and the cell becomes more permeable and more damage can happen that way. So when you consume these fats, it's literally turning you, changing you from the inside out, and it sticks with you for the lifetime of the cell membrane. So it's really important that the fat you eat for that 1 second can stick with you for months. And that's an important point.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, because some people have a cheat day and they go out and have fast food, fried stuff and whatever, and then you're just affecting that
God
cell.
knows what it's doing to your brain for those months that it's sticking in there.
That's amazing. Bruce Lipton has this book, his second book, I can't remember, but it's all about cell membranes. I'm forgetting the title. Mm-hmm. Have you followed his work at all?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so he authored The Biology of Belief, and then he believes that cell membranes are really are what are communicating cell-to-cell communication and psychoneuroimmunological reactions and all this. But that's such a great point, this membrane fluidity. And so going back to the test that you referred to, the omega-3 index, right? Bill Harris.
Yep.
He's got, I think people can do that over the counter, just order, it's like $50 or...
Yeah, you can. Yeah, and it's super important. Yeah, so because the cell membrane really is the interface between the outside world and the inside world of the cell. And a lot of people have thyroid issues or insulin issues, and it's the receptor. You can give all the thyroid hormone you want, but if the hormone isn't hitting the receptor and the signal isn't transmitting into the cell, it's not going to work. And so omega-3s are super important because inflammation surrounds the cell and blocks those signals. And we have the pro-resolving mediators from omega-3 that has the anti-inflammatory effect. So now all of a sudden the receptors are able to get the T3, or they're able to get the insulin and the cell signal into the cell. And so if you want hormones to work, you got to lower the inflammation by having enough omega-3s. And so a fat cell that's deficient in omega-3 is an inflammatory fat cell. Because the pro-resolvins from omega-3s, they can, the omega-3s get into the fat cell, and the resolvins, kind of like I said, they block out the inflammation from the omega-6. And what ends up happening, no one knows if you have an inflammatory fat cell, like, right?
Well, if your belly's up to here, you might assume that.
Probably, yeah. Well, that actually is a good marker, is the visceral adiposity. But there's a lot of thin on the outside, right, fat on the inside, and you don't actually see the expansion really, but you do see the fat in the liver. And so that's one marker of an inflammatory fat cell. And what ends up happening is the fat cell becomes inflamed, and the macrophages then start getting into the fat cell, and they become inflammatory. They turn into type 1 macrophages, and then the fat cell themselves start releasing inflammatory cytokines. So you get the systemic inflammation. Omega-3s come in the fat cell, convert those macrophages type 1 to type 2. Actually, they convert them to anti-inflammatory macrophages. So you can clean up a inflammatory fat cell just by consuming more omega-3s.
It's key. Yeah, I mean, that whole field, I know it's a little complex, that whole meta-inflammation and all that. Yeah. And this idea that our immune cells have different personalities, I mean, that's just such a fascinating topic. I'm so glad. You talk about that in the book too?
I do.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I think practitioners are not yet aware of that, and that needs to be brought out, that we can change the phenotype of our immune system with nutrition, which is key. But I love that you brought up, James, this idea that omega-3s can help us with muscle mass and preserving, muscle mass with age that just naturally happens, with age. So there was one study, I'm sure you talked about in the book, which unfortunately I haven't read yet, but it was about, fish oil users, when they do exercise, they burn a lot more fat and spare muscle. And so it was around 3 grams per day, EPA, DHA.
Yeah, that actually I'm very familiar with that study. So it might not be the same study, but one study showed if you take 6 grams of visible fat from the diet, so like let's say you cut the fat off your steak and you replace it with 6 grams of fish oil, within 4 weeks you lose 2 pounds of fat and you gain a pound of muscle. And just from switching 6 grams of fat to a different fat. And so there is an increase in whole body protein synthesis with omega-3s. And so that's important, whole body protein synthesis. Yeah. So tendons, ligaments, your collagen's important, and so omega-3s help with that as well. And also what's really cool about omega-3s when you're on high doses is it lowers your heart rate. And so that's really important for runners. You can actually run longer, faster without feeling the fatigue because it lowers the oxygen demand throughout your entire body, but specifically the heart as well. So you actually are a much better fat burning machine, and you utilize oxygen better when you have higher omega-3s because of the cell membrane, and it's more fluid and things are just operating at a higher level. It's like switching out a V4 engine with a V8 engine.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, it's just more efficient, right?
It's more efficient.
Yeah. Gosh, we could talk all day about this, and I think it's super fascinating, for people. But I definitely want to talk a little bit more about the carnivorous diet. But anything about your book, fat, omega-3s, omega-6, that we didn't really talk about that are like...
Yeah, that's a good question. So I do want to touch on healthy omega-6s. I don't want to demonize omega-6. So there are intermediates and elongation omega-6s that are formed off of linoleic acid. So if you have a healthy linoleic acid, which so many of us don't anymore because it's all oxidized before it even gets there to the desaturases to elongate it. If you actually have a healthy linoleic acid, it's supposed to go and get elongated to GLA, which is gamma linoleic acid, gets elongated again to dihomo gamma linoleic acid, DGLA, and that's the really important omega-6 fat, because off of that fat, you get a healthy prostaglandin called prostaglandin E1, which is a super potent vasodilator, so it can help lower blood pressure. It's an antiplatelet effects come off of that prostaglandin, and it helps stabilize plaque. The problem is you need a good amount of vitamin C to transmit and convert DGLA to prostaglandin E1. You need good amounts of calcium and zinc. So many people are vitamin and mineral deficient, and they're consuming those fats not from real food, so they're losing out on the vitamins and minerals to now convert those fats into healthy prostaglandins. And so Also, high insulin levels shunt the DGLA away from prostaglandin E1 to arachidonic acid. So you have high insulin levels shunting it to arachidonic acid. You have the inflammation from linoleic acid now converting arachidonic acid into pro-inflammatory prostaglandins and leukotrienes, which can cause asthma and issues like that. And then you have the lack of vitamin C and minerals producing prostaglandin E1. So a lot of people with like atopic dermatitis, ADHD, osteoporosis, dry eye syndrome are lacking on the prostaglandin E1 formed from DGLA because they don't have the vitamins and minerals, and they have the high insulin levels kind of shunning DGLA away from prostaglandin E1. So things like evening primrose, blackcurrant oil, seed oil, things like that, borage, which is the highest in GLA, has been shown in tons of studies to benefit skin conditions, specifically atopic dermatitis and eczema.
Love that. So do you recommend supplementing with those four?
I think specifically if you have issues with either converting linoleic acid to those intermediary healthy omega-6s, so hypothyroidism lowers delta-6 desaturase by about 50%, and that's the enzyme that first converts linoleic acid to GLA. So people with hypothyroidism might need more of that GLA because they're not converting linoleic acid to GLA and then DGLA, prostaglandin E1. So in those people definitely, I think, should supplement because they're not getting those healthy prostaglandin E1. And then age reduces those desaturase enzymes as well. So if you're older, you might need to actually supplement with that healthy GLA fat. So I think it depends on the situation, but magnesium is so important, and 60% of us are just in the general population are deficient, 30% just off of blood levels. But if you actually use better tests, more invasive tests, it's about 60%. But magnesium is super important for that first conversion of linoleic acid to GLA. And so I think a lot of people are suffering from an intermediary omega-6 deficiency because of all the problems with, and so many things required to convert linoleic acid to these healthy intermediary omega-6s.
And then so that's why supplementing can kind of circumvent those deficiencies, micronutrients, whatever it may be, hypothyroidism, gotcha. That's a great, there's a researcher at Wake Forest, Floyd Chilton.
Okay.
You probably come across,
I've heard of him.
He's really been key, instrumental, and Mark Houston as well out of Nashville about when you supplement with a certain, I can't remember the ratio, but they suggested a ratio of EPA DHA to GLA because of everything that you're saying there, the deficiencies and all that. So I don't know that really caught on that well, but I think it's just one more thing that for people to think about. They're like, oh man, I got to buy another fish oil supplement or another, But for those of you listening who are into this, know that there's research out there like that. So that's key. I know you got some other stuff up your sleeve. Anything else that we didn't?
No, I think we hit a lot.
Hit a lot, man. It's amazing. People are gonna hit the rewind button multiple times. But yeah, let's tackle some controversial stuff. And I guess just have people kind of open up. I think like I love blueberries, but I would never eat a diet 100% in blueberries, right? Because even though they're very nutritious, high in polyphenols, fiber, you would be deficient in other things. So what would you say to people that maybe, obviously people can benefit from reducing some of these fermentable carbohydrates, and maybe there are some anti-nutrients in vegetables, but like you said, the fiber helps you to prevent absorbing these persistent organic pollutants. There's polyphenols. Like, where do you stand on this conversation?
I think back in evolutionary times, we didn't have to worry about all this stuff, air pollution and these organic pollutants. And now that we have to, we need to have higher amounts of antioxidants to prevent all the additional oxidative stress. So if we didn't have to deal with that, maybe we could get along with more animal foods. But it's so important, these plant foods with the fiber to soak up a lot of the harmful organic pollutants. And you need the polyphenols now because of all the air pollution and all these microplastics. And we're dealing with just so much stuff now. We got to think and evolve on what is the optimal diet for us today, not what we were when we were cavemen. But I do think that a lot of people benefit from cutting out plants. I personally believe in the health benefits of plants, but there are a lot of people that they just don't jive with it well. And so I don't want to go against the carnivore group because a lot of them have a lot of success stories. Do I really believe that a carnivore diet for most people for a long, long period of time is the ideal diet? I doubt it. I don't know of a single longevity population that only eats muscle meat. I think you can be smart though, and you can include things like liver once a week, and you can include some seafood to get some more of the omega-3s and more minerals like copper and other high minerals that are in seafood that aren't in muscle meat per se. So if you're just eating hunks of muscle meat, you're losing out on a lot of certain vitamins and minerals, folic acid, calcium, copper, manganese, vitamin C. Very important. Maybe you don't need as much on a carnivore diet, but you still need some, and there's an optimal amount. You do not saturate the vitamin C dependent enzymes until you get 120 milligrams. You're gonna get maybe 12 milligrams just eating all muscle meat. So I think it's okay, and I think you feel good on it because it's low inflammation, because part of the eating plants that benefits from it is it's causing a little bit of a hormesis effect. It's a little bit inflammatory, the polyphenols. But that gives you kind of the long-term benefits of them. So I think a blend of both is kind of how I eat. But
that's a great point. I mean, a lot of people don't think about that. They hear anti-nutrient, they think bad. But if we look at exercise creates microinflammation, but it's positive. That's what creates adaptation. So that's that caveat sometimes gets lost in the narrative, because when we talk about vegans or carnivore, it's very extreme, it's polarizing and all that. But I love that you're bringing out, so I just want people to kind of think for themselves. And
I'm glad you brought up anti-nutrient, because everyone demonizes plant foods for phytic acid and phytate. Phytic acid and phytate, if you look at any animal study and even human studies now, one of the strongest anti-cancer cancer inhibitors is phytic acid, and it is one of the strongest calcification inhibitors as well, vascular calcification. So phytate and phytic acid from real whole grains, most whole grains are roller milled nowadays. So you got to find really good ones like Ezekiel bread that just they don't roller mill it. And what ends up happening is when you mill a grain, the granule particle size dramatically determines the health effects. So if it's a large coarse grain that hasn't been ground through a steel roller mill, the increase in the glucose is going to be much lower, and you're going to get a lot more benefits. But that phytic acid, it's been shown to reduce in animal studies tumor growth by like 40%. So they chemically induce cancer in mice, and they give them phytic acid prior to it, and it lowers the number of tumors and the speed and growth of the tumor by about 40%. So it is a cancer inhibitor. And so, it might be an anti-nutrient, but if you're eating an overall high nutrient diet, plus you're getting the phytic acid, which by the way can also bind free iron, and part of the problem with consuming red meat, very high amounts of it, is you have free iron, which is extremely reactive. Phytic acid can actually bind those iron ions and kind of store them and keep them safe in a way from oxidizing in your body. So I think it is important to get some type of phytic acid in your diet.
So you're making your own wheat bread once a week or something like that, or how do you?
So I try to get non-steel roller milled grains that are stored in the refrigerator. If they have to be stored in the refrigerator, that means they still have the vitamin E and the germ in them. A lot of whole grains, they'll take out the germ, which contains the fat, because the fat will start slowly oxidizing, and the expiration date will dramatically go down. So if you're getting a whole grain bread from a refrigerator or a freezer, that's a good telltale that it's actually a whole intact whole grain. And so I love whole grains. I didn't used to. When I started realizing that whole grain fiber is the strongest binder of those organic pollutants, when I started realizing the phytic acid benefits of it, the ferulic acid, which you get also a little bit through coffee, is an extremely potent anti-cancer molecule. I started really delving more into whole grains. And so most of the whole grains out there, though, are complete junk, even the ones labeled. And that's why everyone hates whole grains. But it's that 1% that if you can get it right, I think will dramatically improve your health.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about cultures, you mentioned centenarians and throughout the world, and they hand harvest their own bread. Yeah. And some of these people are living well over 100, Exactly. So that's kind of interesting. John Douillard published a book. He's a Ayurvedic doctor of chiropractic in Colorado. His title of his book is Eat Wheat. And it was really kind of controversial, but he's talking about too, the seasonality of wheat. So wheat comes in season, just like blueberries. And if we eat it every day, that's going to be not in harmony with the seasons. And so, it's great. The phytic acid, I haven't read that research, but I'll dive into it. That's amazing. How are we doing on time there?
Yeah, 16 minutes.
60 minutes, cool. All right, so we can talk a little bit more about what you personally do for your cyclical ketogenic diet.
So I try to lift weights twice a week. I can't lift super heavy anymore. I did injure myself. No, it was like 6 years ago. I tore my pectoralis tendon. So now that's why I'm super into collagen and vitamin C and things to improve that health. So I try to eat really clean because I can't lift as heavy. I used to be able to just bench 300 pounds and eat all the carbs I want. And now I can't do that.
Yeah.
So
you get surgery or no?
No, I didn't. So
is it? So it's a little weak on that side then?
Yeah. So it's really a lot of push-ups and a lot of like band exercises and lightweight, really good technique, really slow hold and then tight. And because I can't do heavy weight, but I still try to maintain that type of diet. And then for a cyclical ketogenic diet, what we recommend in Superfuel is you want to include more carbs and more amino acids, more protein on days you work out, and that just makes more sense. You're going to be able to synthesize more protein, and you're going to be able to reap the benefits of breaking down your muscle by integrating more protein and integrating more carb, because insulin is an anabolic hormone, so more carbs and the insulin response on days you work out is going to build more muscle.
Yeah. And it's that narrative. I mean, so a lot of people are confused about when should I carb cycle, like how many days do I wait? And I follow a very similar approach. You know, if you're not, like today, I'm sitting, traveling, doing this interview with you, going to go back to Seattle. So I'm not going to have any carbs. I'm going to like maybe have one meal a day. It's going to be pretty light. Tomorrow I'm going to lift weights, be active. So that's is that the cyclical nature that you?
Yeah, and really, I mean, one of the best ways to get into ketosis is exercise and building muscle. And so you'll be able to tolerate a lot more carbs when you're just putting on more muscle, and you're gonna be able to reap the benefits of the carbs and burn more of the glucose. And so that's really kind of an important nuance, is that, you know, it's not just about the carbs you're eating, it's how much you're exercising too that dramatically determines the health effects of consuming those carbs.
Totally. That demand, you know, people need to create that through exercise and everything. Yeah. So there's different schools of thought out there. People say like, you know, I do fasted exercise and I don't eat because I want to trigger autophagy and everything like that. Yeah. You just provided a compelling argument to provide those nutrients. Like, where do you stand on that side?
Yeah, I definitely stand on the side of, if you want to build muscle and you're breaking it down, you need the building blocks. So, I mean, the clinical evidence is beyond contestation in reality, that when you consume about 30 grams of protein while you're lifting weights, you're going to synthesize more muscle. I mean, anyone who says, you know, fasting versus and working out is going to build more muscle versus consuming protein and exercising, that's completely false. But do I think there's benefits to intermittent fasting and even 24-hour fasting every now and then? Absolutely, because you are going to be able to strip out the old cells and renew them. And so there is periods where you kind of do want to do, I kind of practice intermittent fasting 3 times a week. I don't even realize it, but breakfast, I try to skip that 3 times a week. On days that I'm not working out, and days that I am working out, I definitely eat breakfast.
I see. Great strategy. But going back to exercise, I've been diving into for the research for the book that I'm working on, is one way to trigger autophagy is to exercise. Yeah. And so a lot of people think it's just fasting, and you know, they approach this from a weight loss perspective, and they kind of forget about exercise. And while fasting can probably help, you know, with glycemic levels, liver fat, all that, exercise is great to pair with that. And so, yeah, part of the benefits, like when we get bigger muscles, is autophagy driven. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, you literally grow new mitochondria too. So there's something called mitophagy as well, where you renew new mitochondria. And so there's been studies where supplementing with omega-3s helps you grow more mitochondria too. And obviously exercise does the same thing. So pair the two, you get double the benefit.
Love it, man. Let's finish up a little bit on the micronutrient deficiencies creating like obesity and hyperphagia. You worked on a paper with Amy Berger, who we've had on the show and stuff. And I think that's a concept that we were talking about offline that people have kind of intuitively knew for a while, like streaking out these high calorie foods in quest for micronutrients just creates a vicious cycle.
Yeah, so if you look at obesity as like a hormonal imbalance, so you have higher insulin levels that are kind of locking away fats and protein, and you're not able to use them, and then it's triggering hunger and more carb cravings, right? Minerals have a dramatic effect on insulin sensitivity in the cell. And so numerous studies have shown magnesium deficiency, chromium deficiency, vitamin C deficiency, copper deficiency, manganese deficiency, any deficiency in any of those minerals, there's really good evidence to show it causes insulin resistance. And so if you're deficient in one of those or multiple, which most Americans are now, you're becoming more insulin resistant. And then when you're compounding it with sugar, which is just pure calories, and you're not getting those minerals and vitamins anymore, the more sugar you consume, the more nutrient depleted you become, because there's B vitamins that are required to metabolize the sugar, and magnesium as well. And so it's sucking out vitamins and minerals just for you to liberate the calories from the sugar. And so you're slowly becoming depleted in those vitamins and minerals. And then there's the other side of energy depletion, ATP depletion. And so when you fructose damages the cell and damages the mitochondria, so they don't produce as much ATP. And so you're obese, but you have lower ATP, lower energy, lower nutrient, and so you're overfed and undernourished.
Yeah, I think intuitively people thought about that, but I'm grateful that you guys did the research, to.
Yeah.
So we'll put a link to that paper. Cool. That was BMJ?
Oh, yeah, BMJ Open Heart. Yep. Okay.
That's awesome. We'll put a link there. And so you got the book. It's coming out early November.
Yep.
We'll post this about a week before this comes out. But how was it to work with Dr. Mercola? I mean, he's been a huge influencer in this space.
Yeah. Super smart guy. He knows his stuff. And I think he brought a lot of good ideas to the book in regards to, supplementation and things like that. And I think, it was smooth. It was good.
That's awesome. Yeah. Who inspires you in this space? I mean, there's so many different people out there. I mean, you've been on the Dr. Oz, the doctors. I mean, you've been really out there. Mark Hyman, everything like that. Who do you look up to and stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. Really, one of my colleagues, Mark McCarty, he's awesome. And me and him really try to pinpoint mechanisms of action when it comes to certain substances. So right now we've done a lot of research on glycine, supporting collagen health. And so we've published about 3 papers on that. And looking into the effects of amino acids as building blocks for hormones and building blocks for glutathione and things like that. And so he's awesome. And I have so much respect for him.
What do you think about glycine for sleep and GABA
Great.
and all that?
Oh yeah, it's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. There's good data. 3 grams before bedtime definitely helps with sleep. We're not able to synthesize enough for optimal collagen just because of the way it was formulated in 580 million years ago in smaller animals, and it never actually improved. And so we're only able to synthesize about 3 grams. We probably need about 10 to 15 for optimal collagen health. And so that's why I supplement with about 10 grams of glycine per day.
Wow. In a powder form, probably at that dose.
Yeah, I do powder, and it kind of sucks though, the taste, to be honest. It's a little sweet, but it has a weird aftertaste, so I try to do pills as well.
That's amazing.
And then I also obviously do hydrolyzed collagen too.
I see. Okay. I've always been a little bit, I know people have great benefits from collagen, but I've always wondered the sourcing on that. Is it bottom of the barrel? I mean, do you have any?
Yeah, no, sourcing's got to be good because it'll be contaminated with heavy metals if it's not from a good source. So grass-fed, organic preferably if you can. A low molecular weight, so different collagens. Some collagens can have 4 grams of glycine and 15 grams of collagen. Others might only have 2.5. So there's definitely differences there. But you do need the building blocks for collagen, so it is important to consume especially glycine. So glycine makes up every 3rd amino acid on collagen, which is why it's so important. And the reason is because it has the small side chain of any amino acid, allows the 3 polypeptide chains to get close and twist like a rope, gives collagen its strength. So glycine is super important, and that's why I supplement with it. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. That's amazing. God, I mean, you have so much information packed in this brain. It's amazing. Like I said, I've interviewed a lot of different people and just the mechanisms. Do you read a lot of academic papers?
Yeah. I mean, I've published over 200 myself. So, normally when I publish a paper, I'm normally the lead author and I do all the research. And so most of my papers have at least 100 references. The one subclinical magnesium paper I published in BMJ Open Heart had 250. And that's probably one of the most super proud papers ever that I wrote. But yeah, I do love to read a lot and do a lot of research.
As a researcher, do you look at, sometimes now Plus One Biology or BMJ will show how many people have viewed the page or read it and so forth? Yeah. Does that kind of get you excited because people
Yeah, the alt metric, depending on press and how much you get, that's kind of, to me, more important than a lot of people kind of the impact factor, New England Journal of Medicine has a big impact factor, but if you get something press released, you can have a much broader impact on the general population, especially if it's an open access journal.
Yeah.
So.
As a researcher, I mean, are you impressed or not impressed by when a journalist reaches out to you? Are they looking for the cursory information, or do they really take the time and interview you and get all the details? How does that process work?
Yeah, it depends. I think if there's lead time on a press release and they have 3 or 4 days, they can do more due diligence. They'll call me. They'll maybe call me a second time, and they'll get other opinions as well. But if it's something that it wasn't really press release, but they just saw come out, they might just kind of throw their own thing together and might not even contact me. It just depends.
How does that make you feel when you read it? Whatever.
Yeah.
So then when you see these New York Times or op-ed pieces reviewing whatever nutrient, vitamin E, vitamin C, whatever, you don't probably put much weight into that because you know that.
Yeah, not really. A lot of the New York Times stuff on fish oil, I think they got wrong. And a lot of recent articles on collagen, I think, have have it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There should almost be like a peer-reviewed board for that, right? Because, I mean, their reach is wide, and people just read an article like in the lay press, but don't go back and actually vet it in, in the academic peer-reviewed article.
Yep.
Gosh, well, we're super grateful for you, Dr. James. I mean, it's great to have you back for a second time here in Buffalo. Got the new book coming out, and then also you're working on, if it's okay to talk about.
Yeah, me and Dr. Fung working on a book called Longevity Solution. So I think it's like 13 chapters, really cool stuff on green tea, red wine, glycine and collagen, protein and healthy proteins, what proteins you should eat, shouldn't for longevity. So it's cool. Yeah, we're excited about it.
And that's going to be in the spring as well.
Right now, tentatively May, but we'll see.
That's awesome. So if we could finish off like on a morning routine or habit that you do that you think really gives you like the most mental clarity, energy, and consistency to like crank out this content that you're doing for the world, what would you attribute your success to?
Yeah, I think just my personality, to be honest. I mean, I'm super focused. This is something that's super important to me, and I just make the time for it. I don't think there's any magic pill that like gives me the strength or cognitive performance to do it. Just like you, you're really into it.
Right. How's your wife put up with all the research and everything?
She's the best wife, honestly, and she takes care of the kids so great and lets me write like on the weekends and at night, and she knows it's something I love, and so, I mean, she's my partner, and we just get along great. So.
Yeah. Is she a stay-at-home mother? Or
she is.
Okay.
Yeah.
That helps.
Yeah.
And you find like on the weekends and at night, that's your most creative time? That's when you crank out content?
Well, actually, the most creative time is probably the morning too, before work. Coffee's in me, like cortisol's flowing. Definitely the morning, to be honest, but
yeah. That's great. So if you're going to look something up, do you go to Google Scholar first or like PubMed?
Yeah, so PubMed, 100%. I mean, sometimes dude, for the salt fix, it was ridiculous. I think I spent 3 years, like almost every day researching for that book. Wow. And yeah, I mean, I probably read well over 1,000 studies.
Yeah, I get direct messages on Instagram quite a bit from people that want to research more, so I just wanted to help them out.
Yeah, no, that's,
Yeah. I like Google Scholar because you can sometimes scavenge a PDF from some random website where it's stored, and PubMed doesn't always tell you that. But do you find that like more and more journals are becoming more open access and things?
Yeah, there are. So for Superfuel, I did probably about 3 years of research too, and you do try to grab those open access ones first. But like you said, it's kind of a rabbit hole. You read one paper, you find 10 great references. Now you got to find those references. Then those 10 give you 10, and all of a sudden 1,000 studies later, 3 years later, there's
like,
your book.
Where did I start with this?
Exactly.
That's amazing, bud. So do you guys have any bonuses, or is there a website like if folks are listening right now?
Yeah. So I'm actually launching drjamesdinick.com. That'll be hopefully when the book comes out. So I'll have some content on there. And so obviously my Dr. James Dinick, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, I'm pretty active, and I put out a lot of good stuff out.
Definitely, Twitter is like your biggest source, I would say. So definitely, guys, if you're not following Dr. James on Twitter, please do that right now. I'll put links here. Get the book, pre-order the book. That really helps, like book rankings and everything like that. Write a review if you're watching this and it's out. That's super helpul.
Super helpful, yeah.
And if you haven't yet read The Salt Fix, definitely check that out. That book was amazing. I mean, a game changer. To me, that really like, that's a totally unique book. And you were the first to market there to really help people.
Thanks, so I appreciate that.
That's awesome. And then you got the longevity solution coming out, so that's great. So what about a Patreon? That's what you need. You need a Patreon account because you got so much here. You can just write like quick blogs and then have people pay a small amount.
Yeah, I know. Dave Feldman, who I have so much respect for. He's a great guy. You guys should contribute to his Patreon. Shout out to him. But yeah, that'd be something cool too.
Okay. Well, if it's out by the time we post this or whatever, I'll put it in the link. So really appreciate your time, buddy.
Good seeing you,
awesome.
Mike, always.
Thank you. All right, guys, really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, just hit that like button. You can subscribe to the channel. And I know Dr. James does follow the comments. So if you have a question, comment, hit that, and then we'll try and get him to interact. And we'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.